Tef's primary sensory membrane pulsed with anxiety as the human delegation approached. After 87 cycles studying alien life forms, this was the first time she'd interfaced with a species whose biological functions hadn't been fully mapped by the collective's vast libraries. These, humans, were an anomaly, a technologically advanced civilization that had somehow escaped detection until their experimental FTL drive punched a hole through subspace right next to a collective observation post. The atmospheric scrubbers in Tef's encounter suit worked overtime, filtering out the unfamiliar cocktail of gases the humans exhaled. Her 8 sensor stalks twitched involuntarily, collecting data and feeding it directly to her neural augments. Dr. Rivera, Tef said through her translation module, addressing the lead human. Your vital signs indicate elevated stress hormones. Are our accommodation protocols insufficient? Elena Rivera, Earth's foremost xenoanthropologist, flashed what Tef had learned was called a smile. The gesture still struck Tef as moderately threatening, the bearing of bone-grinding tools used for mastication, but she'd adapted to this cultural quirk. Just excitement, xenobiologist Tef, Elena replied, her dark eyes scanning the translucent curves of the collective's diplomatic vessel. Humans tend to produce adrenaline when we're making history. Tef's membrane rippled in acknowledgement. The collective appreciates your species' enthusiasm. We've prepared the simulation chamber for today's cultural exchange as requested. The human delegation followed Tef through corridors that shifted and rearranged to accommodate their bipedal locomotion. 6 humans in total, 3 scientists and 3 military observers, as per the exchange protocol. The military presence had been a non-negotiable condition from Earth's Unified Defense Council, much to the confusion of the collective, whose species had evolved beyond physical conflict approximately 14,000 cycles ago. The chamber ahead will interface with your neural patterns, Tef explained as they approached a pulsing doorway. It creates a shared experiential space where we can interact without physical limitations. Your military observers seemed particularly interested in our combat training simulations. Commander Jacobs, a compact human with skin the color of Earth's oceans and a perpetual furrow between her eyes, leaned forward. You have combat training but no physical conflict. That's like practicing swimming in the desert. Tef's translation module struggled momentarily with the idiom before supplying meaning. We maintain combat protocols for historical and anthropological purposes only. The primary function is to understand the evolutionary path of sentient species. Combat aptitude is generally a developmental phase all technological civilizations pass through. She paused. Most eventually outgrow it. Or they get conquered by those who don't, muttered Jacobs. The simulation chamber pulsed with welcome as they entered. Walls of shifting luminescence surrounded them, the floor a cool, yielding substance that adjusted to each visitor's preferred tactile setting. Dr. Rivera approached the center of the room. We've brought simulations of our own to share. Earth's history, art, cultural development. We've also included basic combat techniques as requested, though I'm still not clear on why a peaceful civilization would want. Comparative xenobiology, Tef interrupted smoothly. We catalog all species' developmental traits. Combat styles reflect evolutionary pressures unique to your world. The truth was more complicated. The collective had encountered 47 spacefaring civilizations over 9 million cycles. All had followed predictable developmental patterns. All had eventually self-regulated their aggressive tendencies through genetic augmentation, neural dampening, or technological safeguards. Initial scans of humans showed none of these evolutionary adaptations. No built-in limitations. No off switch. It was unprecedented. And potentially dangerous. Let's begin with a cultural exchange, Tef suggested, her membrane pulsing with scientific curiosity. Your Earth music, perhaps. 3 hours later, after sampling Earth's artistic achievements, historical milestones, and culinary preferences, the last purely theoretical, as Tef's species absorbed nutrients through membrane osmosis, they turned to the combat simulations. The collective maintains historical records of all known combat forms, Tef explained as the chamber transformed around them. "We'll share ours if Commander Jacobs would demonstrate yours." The chamber became a featureless plane of golden light, a universal training ground recognized across galaxies. Commander Jacobs stepped forward, her military uniform replaced by the chamber with fitted exercise attire. "Parameters?" she asked, stretching her upper limbs in what Tef recognized as a warm-up ritual. "Standard endurance combat protocol. The simulation will escalate difficulty until you signal defeat or can no longer continue." Jacob snorted. "So I fight until I say uncle?" Tef's membrane flickered in confusion. "Uncle? Human expression. It means surrender." "Ah. Yes. The Universal Surrender Protocol is recognized by the chamber. You may begin whenever ready." The other humans backed away, forming a viewing circle with Tef and her two collective colleagues. Commander Jacob centered herself, dropped into a defensive stance, and nodded. The simulation began. A humanoid light construct appeared, mimicking basic combat moves. Jacobs dispatched it with efficient strikes. 2 more appeared. Then 4. Then 8. The difficulty increased incrementally, just as it would for any collective member during historical reenactments. After 20 minutes, Jacobs was facing a swarm of opponents with sophisticated attack patterns. She moved with remarkable coordination, her respiratory rate elevated but stable. Tef recorded everything, particularly intrigued by the human's thermal regulation. Her skin glistened with moisture, a cooling technique totally foreign to membrane-based life. At 30 minutes, when most collective members would trigger their defeat recognition subroutines, Jacobs was bleeding from a split lip and moving with a slight limp. The simulation had reached its highest standard difficulty. "Enough," Tef called, expecting the human to gratefully exit the simulation. "I'm fine," Jacobs growled, ducking under a light construct's attack. "Just getting warmed up." Tef's colleagues rippled with concern. "The human continues despite clear biological damage indicators," one whispered through their private neural channel. "Observe," Tef replied. "This confirms my hypothesis." At 45 minutes, Jacobs was surrounded by 20 light constructs. Her movements had slowed, but her determination appeared to have increased. She was bleeding from several minor wounds, her breathing labored, limbs trembling with fatigue, yet her eyes showed no recognition of defeat. "Commander," Dr. Rivera finally called out. "I think you've made your point." Jacobs ignored her, delivering a spinning kick to a construct that had nearly pinned her. The movement cost her balance, and 3 constructs piled on, pinning her to the ground, a clear defeat condition in any rational combat system. Yet Jacobs didn't surrender. She struggled, broke free, and continued fighting. Tef signaled the chamber to end the simulation. The constructs vanished, leaving Jacobs panting in the center of the room, fists still raised. "What the hell?" she protested, wiping blood from her face. "I wasn't done." The human delegation seemed unsurprised by this reaction. The collective members pulsed with collective astonishment. "Commander Jacobs," Tef said carefully, "the simulation reached maximum difficulty parameters 15 minutes ago. You sustained multiple injuries that would trigger automatic withdrawal for any collective member." "Yeah, well, I'm not a collective member," Jacobs replied, accepting a hydration container from Dr. Rivera. "On Earth, we train past the point of comfort. That's how you improve." Tef's sensory stalks vibrated with fascination. "You were experiencing pain, fatigue, and diminished coordination, all biological signals to cease inactivity. Yet you continued. How?" Jacob shrugged, a casual human gesture that belied the significance of what Tef was witnessing. "You ignore it. Push through. Mind over matter." "But why?" pressed Tef's colleague. "What evolutionary advantage comes from overriding biological safety mechanisms?" Dr. Rivera stepped forward. "Earth's evolutionary history favored persistence. Our early ancestors weren't the strongest or fastest predators, but we could outlast prey through endurance hunting. We'd chase animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. Fascinating, Tef murmured, her membrane rippling with scientific excitement. And this persistence trait carried into your combat protocols? It carried into everything we do, Commander Jacobs said, stretching her sore muscles. Humans don't have natural weaponry like claws or overwhelming strength. What we have is the ability to keep going when any sensible creature would stop. Tef's neural augments were processing this information at maximum capacity. The implications were staggering. A species without an inherent off switch. No biological surrender protocol. No self-limiting safety systems. I would like to observe more humans in combat situations, Tef said. For comparative xenobiology purposes. Over the next week, Tef observed all 3 military observers in combat simulations. Each demonstrated the same inexplicable persistence, fighting past exhaustion, ignoring pain, continuing despite clear biological indicators that they should stop. Even more intriguing, they seemed to draw satisfaction from this process, their neurochemical readings showing pleasure responses to what should be distress signals. On the 8th day of the exchange, Tef presented her findings to the collective central protocol, the governing consciousness that coordinated their civilization. These humans represent an anomaly in our catalog of sentient species, she explained, transmitting her data through neural channels. They lack the standard biological limiters that prevent self-destruction through overexertion. Assessment of threat level? Queried the central protocol. Uncertain, Tef admitted. Their persistence could make them dangerous adversaries, but they've shown no aggression toward the collective. In fact, they seem eager for alliance. Recommendation? Tef pulsed thoughtfully. We should offer them our standard evolutionary assistance package. Gene therapies that would regulate their tendency toward self-destruction through persistence. 2 days later, Tef met with the human delegation to present the collective's offer. The meeting took place in an Earth-approximating environment the collective had constructed, gravity at 9.8 meters per square second, atmosphere calibrated to 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, temperature at 22 degrees Celsius. The collective extends an offer of evolutionary assistance, Tef announced, projecting images of genetic structures into the air between them. We've identified what we believe is a developmental oversight in human physiology. Specifically, your species lacks standard biological limiters that prevent self-harm through overexertion. Dr. Rivera's expression shifted to what Tef's cultural database identified as cautious neutrality. Commander Jacobs' face registered immediate suspicion. You want to modify our DNA? Jacobs asked. A simple adjustment, Tef assured them. The procedure would integrate safety protocols that would signal unmistakable defeat recognition when your bodies reach dangerous levels of exertion. All other species we've encountered evolved these naturally or developed them artificially as they matured technologically. So you want to install an off switch, Dr. Rivera said slowly. A way for humans to recognize when we should surrender or retreat. Precisely, Tef's membrane pulsed with satisfaction at their understanding. It would prevent unnecessary suffering and potential self-destruction. A sign of evolutionary advancement. The humans exchanged glances that Tef couldn't fully interpret. What happens, Commander Jacobs asked carefully, when your civilization encounters a threat that can't be overcome without pushing past biological safety limits? Tef's membrane rippled in confusion. Such scenarios don't exist in practical terms. If a challenge exceeds biological capability, technological solutions are deployed. And if those fail, pressed Jacobs. Then adaptation over evolutionary timeframes is the appropriate response, Tef explained patiently. No immediate challenge justifies biological self-destruction. Dr. Rivera leaned forward. Xenobiologist Tef, we appreciate the collective's concern for our well-being. But what you see as a developmental oversight, we consider a cornerstone of human achievement. Our greatest accomplishments came from individuals pushing past natural limitations. But the strain on your organic systems, Tef began, is something we've evolved to handle, Rivera finished. Human history is full of impossible situations overcome through sheer persistence. Marathon runners collapsing after victories. Parents lifting vehicles off trapped children. Explorers surviving against all odds. Our persistence isn't a bug, it's our most essential feature. Tef's sensory stalks twitched with frustration. The humans weren't understanding the benevolence of the offer. Your species operates without crucial safety parameters. In our experience, this inevitably leads to systemic failure. Commander Jacob stood up, her posture shifting to what Tef recognized as confrontational stance beta. Let me be clear, Jacob said. We're not interested in having an off switch installed. Earth's Unified Defense Council would consider any attempt to modify human genetics in this manner an act of aggression. The diplomatic atmosphere chilled instantly. Tef's membrane pulsed with alarm signals. No aggression was intended, she assured them quickly. The offer was made in the spirit of evolutionary cooperation. The collective respects your autonomy. Dr. Rivera nodded, her expression softening. We understand, and we value this alliance. But you need to understand something fundamental about humans. We don't view our persistence as a flaw. It saved our species countless times. Interesting, Tef acknowledged, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic concerns. Can you provide examples? Rivera and Jacob spent the next hour describing human achievements that stemmed from what Tef could only classify as irrational persistence, explorers continuing despite frostbite and starvation, scientists working without sleep for days to solve urgent problems, athletes performing despite severe injuries. Tef recorded everything, her neural augment struggling to reconcile these accounts with established xenobiological principles. Every example violated the core biological directive of self-preservation. Yet the humans spoke of these violations with pride. I request permission to continue studying this unique trait, Tef said as the meeting concluded. The collective withdraws its offer of genetic assistance but maintains interest in scientific exchange. Commander Jacobs nodded sharply. Granted, as long as it's observation only. No experiments. Later that cycle, as Tef prepared her updated report for the Central Protocol, alarm signals flooded the ship's neural network. Her membrane stiffened with shock as she processed the incoming data. The observation post where humans had first made contact had gone silent. Not just silent, it had been destroyed. The final transmission showed something unprecedented in 14,000 cycles of collective history. An attack. From a species previously catalogued as non-threatening. A miscalculation of catastrophic proportions. The Central Protocol issued immediate instructions: secure the human delegation. Prepare defensive measures. Establish Emergency Protocol Alpha 97. Tef hesitated, her sensory stalks vibrating with indecision. The humans had just explicitly rejected modification of their persistence trait. They had demonstrated remarkable capacity for continued function despite biological damage. And now the collective faced an enemy it hadn't fought in thousands of cycles. Perhaps, Tef thought, what they needed wasn't an off switch, but a species that didn't have one. Tef stood before the human delegation, her membrane fluctuating between standard diplomatic cyan and emergency alert crimson. The atmospheric stabilizers in the chamber worked overtime to compensate for her distress pheromones. We've received disturbing news, she announced without preamble. The Nishak have attacked our observation post in Sector 7. Commander Jacob straightened immediately, military training overriding diplomatic niceties. Casualties? 827 collective members, Tef replied, her voice modulator flattening with grief. Total loss of the station. Dr. Rivera stepped forward. I'm deeply sorry, xenobiologist Tef. But who are the Nishak? Tef's membrane rippled as her neural augments projected a holographic image between them, a species with dense exoskeletons, 6 articulated limbs, and mandibles evolved for crushing complex metals. They moved with unsettling mechanical precision. The collective catalogued the Nishak as a Class 3 civilization 3,000 cycles ago. They appeared to follow standard evolutionary pathways: technological advancement, development of space travel, establishment of interplanetary colonies. Tef's sensor stalks twitched with agitation. We miscalculated. The Nishak never developed the standard biological limiters. Instead, they implemented technological constructs that suppressed their pain responses and exhaustion indicators. They've been simulating peaceful development while secretly preparing for expansion. They've been playing possum, Commander Jacobs muttered. Tef's translation module hesitated before supplying meaning. An apt metaphor. They presented as a species that had outgrown combat while developing weapons and tactics we haven't needed in 14,000 cycles. Dr. Rivera's expression turned grave. Why are you telling us this? The treaty doesn't require Earth to involve itself in collective conflicts. Tef's membrane pulsed once, sharply, the equivalent of a humorless laugh. The Nishak attacked because they detected our first contact with your species. The observation post contained all our preliminary data on humans. They saw what I saw, a species with no surrender protocol, no biological off switch. They're afraid of us, Jacobs concluded, a dangerous smile playing at her lips. With reason, Tef acknowledged. The collective hasn't engaged in physical conflict for over 10,000 cycles. Our combat protocols exist purely for historical study. We've evolved past the psychological capacity for sustained aggression. In other words, Commander Jacobs said, you've lost your killer instinct. We never had one, Tef corrected. Aggressive expansion was deemed evolutionarily inefficient by the Central Protocol long ago. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the human delegation. Dr. Rivera was the first to speak. You want our help. Tef's membrane shifted to formal acknowledgement indigo. The collective formally requests Earth's military assistance in addressing the Nishak threat. Our defensive systems can repel initial advances, but we lack the psychological framework for extended conflict. Commander Jacobs crossed her arms. You want us to fight a war for you because we don't know when to quit? I want you to save 14 species under collective protection because you possess a trait we deliberately evolved past, Tef countered. The trait we just offered to fix in your species. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. 4 hours later, after urgent communications with Earth's Unified Defense Council, the humans reached a decision. The diplomatic vessel's central chamber had been reconfigured into a war room, with holographic displays showing Nishak fleet movements across 3 sectors. Earth will provide assistance, Commander Jacobs announced, now speaking with the full authority of the UDC. But we have conditions. Tef's membrane signaled attentive reception. The collective is prepared to offer substantial technological exchange. We don't want your tech, Jacobs interrupted. We want unrestricted access to all collective data on the Nishak. Biology, psychology, technology, everything. And we want it now. Tef conveyed the request to the Central Protocol. Authorization came immediately. Granted, she said. What else? We need transport for our specialized combat units, Jacobs continued. Earth's FTL capabilities are limited to small vessels. We'll need your ships to move our troops and equipment. Again, Tef relayed the request and received approval. The collective will provide transportation. Is there anything else? Dr. Rivera stepped forward. Yes. A formal acknowledgement that human persistence is recognized as a valuable evolutionary trait, not a defect to be corrected. Tef's membrane flushed deep purple, embarrassment. The collective acknowledges its error in judgment. Human persistence will be reclassified in our evolutionary databases. Within 24 hours, Earth's specialized combat units began arriving via collective transport ships. Tef watched with scientific fascination as human soldiers prepared for battle. Their methods seemed chaotic compared to the historical combat protocols and collective records, a mixture of rigid discipline and improvisation that defied categorization. Commander Jacobs had been promoted to acting general and coordinated directly with the Central Protocol. Meanwhile, Tef found herself assigned as xenobiological liaison to a unit called Fireteam Dagger, 6 humans selected for what their records called extreme persistence profiles. Their leader, Captain Nora Chen, had survived 14 days stranded in Earth's Atacama Desert with minimal supplies. Another team member had continued fighting after sustaining 3 gunshot wounds during a peacekeeping operation. A third had broken both legs during mountain training and crawled 4 kilometers to the extraction point. Your selection criteria is concerning, Tef told Captain Chen during their first briefing. Chen grinned, an expression Tef now recognized as indicating amusement rather than aggression. You wanted humans who don't know when to quit. That's us. The first engagement with Nishak forces came 3 days later in a binary star system near the collective Central Territories. Tef observed from the command vessel as Fireteam Dagger led a strike mission against a Nishak forward base. What followed challenged everything in Tef's scientific understanding. The humans didn't just fight, they adapted. When Nishak defenses countered their initial approach, they immediately developed new tactics. When their primary weapons proved ineffective against Nishak exoskeletons, they repurposed environmental systems as makeshift weapons. When 3 team members sustained injuries that would have triggered automatic withdrawal in any collective combat simulation, they applied emergency medical treatments and continued fighting. This is madness, Tef's colleague whispered through their private neural channel as they watched the humans advance through the Nishak base despite mounting injuries. This is persistence, Tef replied. The battle lasted 26 hours, far beyond the duration of any conflict in collective records. When it ended, the Nishak base had been neutralized, and all 6 members of Fireteam Dagger had survived, though each carried injuries that would have incapacitated a collective member. In the medical bay afterward, Tef approached Captain Chen, who was having a deep laceration in her arm sealed by an autodock. Your team continued fighting despite clear biological indicators that you should withdraw, Tef observed. How is this possible? Chen winced as the autodock finished its work. Mind over matter. You keep going until the job's done. But the pain. Pain is just information, Chen interrupted. You can choose how to process that information. Tef's membrane rippled with revelation. You override your biological imperatives through sheer conscious will. That's what makes us human, Chen said with a tired smile. We decide when we're done, not our bodies. Over the next 2 weeks, human combat units engaged Nishak forces across 3 sectors. The pattern was always the same. The Nishak would initially dominate through superior technology and environmental adaptations, but the humans would persist, adapt, and eventually prevail through what their military doctrines called asymmetric warfare. The Central Protocol struggled to process the implications. These humans operate outside all established combat parameters, it communicated to Tef. They continue functioning at 30% biological efficiency. They improvise weapons from environmental systems. They ignore injuries that our models classify as debilitating. They persist, Tef replied simply. The turning point came during the 3rd week of conflict. Nishak forces had penetrated to within 1 system of the collective's primary hub world. 3,000 collective members had been lost, a casualty rate unprecedented in their recorded history. The Central Protocol called an emergency session with the human leadership. General Jacobs arrived with Dr. Rivera and Captain Chen, whose arm was still in a regeneration sleeve from the previous battle. The Nishak have adapted to our standard defensive protocols, the Central Protocol explained through its communication array. Our predictive models show an 87.3% probability of breakthrough to our core worlds within 6 days. Let me guess, General Jacobs said. Your defensive systems are automated and follow fixed protocols. Correct. All collective defense systems operate on established evolutionary principles of efficiency and minimal harm. Jacobs exchanged glances with Rivera. And the Nishak have figured out those principles. It appears so. Then we need to do something they won't predict, Captain Chen suggested. Something that defies evolutionary logic. Tef's membrane pulsed with sudden inspiration. Like continuing to fight when all biological indicators signal defeat. Exactly, Chen nodded. We need to introduce human persistence into your defense systems. The plan that emerged was unprecedented in collective history. Human strategic analysts would temporarily interface with the collective's defensive network, introducing randomness, persistence, and what General Jacobs called sheer bloody-mindedness into its protocols. Your automated systems retreat when facing a 60% probability of defeat, Jacobs explained. We're going to rewrite that to keep fighting until the probability hits 99%. That violates basic preservation protocols, the central protocol objected. That's the point, Dr. Rivera said. The Nishak are counting on your predictable self-preservation instinct. They'll never expect you to fight like humans. The integration process took 18 hours, an eternity in computational terms. Human strategic principles were translated into collective command protocols, fundamentally altering 14,000 cycles of established defensive doctrine. Tef observed the process with scientific fascination and existential dread. We're introducing chaos into perfect order, she told Dr. Rivera. Sometimes chaos is exactly what you need, Rivera replied. Evolution itself isn't a tidy process. It's messy, opportunistic, and often irrational in the short term. When the Nishak fleet arrived at the edge of the collective's core system, they encountered something entirely new. Defense systems that didn't retreat when expected, automated units that continued fighting despite sustaining critical damage, and battle patterns that defied logical prediction. For the first time, the Nishak faced an opponent that wouldn't surrender when their evolutionary cost-benefit analysis said they should. The battle lasted 9 days, the longest continuous conflict in recorded collective history. Tef remained at the Central Command hub throughout, observing as human officers made decisions that violated every principle of self-preservation in the collective's evolutionary database. When the Nishak finally retreated, their fleet reduced by 70%, the Central Protocol called Tef to a private consultation. This human trait, persistence beyond biological indicators, contradicts our understanding of evolutionary efficiency, it communicated. Perhaps our understanding is incomplete, Tef suggested, her membrane pulsing with the excitement of new scientific frontiers. The humans evolved on a planet with extraordinary environmental pressures. Their persistence wasn't a developmental oversight but an adaptive advantage. An advantage we sacrificed in our pursuit of efficiency, the Central Protocol acknowledged. This raises profound questions about our evolutionary path. After the Nishak retreat, a formal ceremony was held aboard the collective's central hub. General Jacobs, Dr. Rivera, and the human combat units were honored with the highest recognition the collective could bestow, permanent inclusion in their evolutionary database as exemplars of adaptive potential. In the observatory dome afterward, Tef found Captain Chen staring out at the glittering expanse of the galaxy. Chen's injuries had mostly healed, though medical augments indicated she would carry permanent damage in her left shoulder, damage she had sustained while continuing to fight despite clear withdrawal indicators. The collective has existed for 20,000 cycles, Tef said, joining her at the viewport. In all that time, we believed we understood the optimal evolutionary pathway for sentient species. You've challenged that understanding. Chen smiled faintly. We're pretty good at challenging established wisdom. Your species should have failed by all our evolutionary models, Tef continued. Your pain responses are insufficient to prevent self-harm. Your threat assessment allows continued action despite overwhelming probability of failure. Your resource allocation during stress conditions prioritizes mission completion over self-preservation. And yet, here we are, Chen replied, gesturing to the stars. Still kicking. Tef's membrane rippled with what she was beginning to recognize as humor. The Central Protocol has approved a comprehensive revision of our evolutionary databases. We're reclassifying human persistence from developmental oversight to environmental adaptation. Glad to hear we're not defective after all. On the contrary, Tef said, her voice modulator shifting to express sincerity. You've demonstrated an evolutionary pathway we never considered viable. A species that continues functioning despite all biological indicators to cease, that chooses when to stop rather than being stopped by predetermined limitations. Chen turned from the viewport to face Tef directly. That's what consciousness is ultimately for, isn't it? Overriding instinct when necessary. Making choices that pure biology wouldn't make. Tef's sensory stalks vibrated with the profound implications. Perhaps that's the true evolutionary purpose of advanced consciousness, not just to optimize survival, but to occasionally defy biological imperatives for higher-order goals. Like protecting others, Chen added. Fighting for something bigger than yourself. A fascinating hypothesis, Tef acknowledged. One that will take the collective many cycles to fully explore. Just don't spend too long thinking about it, Chen said with a smirk. Sometimes you have to act before all the data is in. Tef's membrane pulsed with agreement. Another human trait we may need to incorporate into our protocols. 3 days later, as the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, the Central Protocol announced a historic decision. For the first time in 12,000 cycles, the collective would establish a permanent military alliance with another species. The Nishak threat remains, it explained during the formal announcement. And while our defenses have been enhanced with human strategic principles, we recognize the unique value of human persistence in confronting existential challenges. Dr. Rivera, representing Earth's diplomatic interests, accepted the alliance with measured enthusiasm. Humanity is pleased to continue this partnership, though we hope future exchanges will focus more on cultural and scientific matters than military necessity. As do we, the Central Protocol agreed. But the galaxy has proven more complex than our models predicted. Adaptation is necessary. Later, as the first human permanent liaison officers settled into their quarters on the collective's hub world, Tef completed her final report on human persistence. The trait we initially classified as a developmental flaw represents an alternate solution to the complex problem of survival, she recorded. Humans have evolved not to avoid damage but to continue functioning despite it, not to recognize defeat but to redefine it through sheer will. She paused, her membrane rippling with scientific satisfaction. In 14,000 cycles of cataloging sentient species, we never encountered a civilization without an off switch in combat situations. We believed such a trait would be evolutionarily unsustainable. The humans have proven otherwise. On the final day before returning to her research duties, Tef visited the combat simulation chamber where she had first observed Commander Jacobs, now General Jacobs, demonstrating human persistence. The chamber was being modified with new protocols based on human combat techniques. Xenobiologist Tef called a familiar voice. Dr. Rivera approached, carrying what appeared to be a small Earth artifact. Dr. Rivera. I thought you departed for Earth. Tomorrow, Rivera said. I wanted to give you something first. She held out the small object, a metallic disc with strange markings. What is it? Tef asked, her sensory stalks examining the unfamiliar item. An ancient Earth coin, Rivera explained. From a civilization called Sparta. Their warriors were famous for their persistence in battle. Their motto was either with your shield or on it, meaning come back victorious or dead, but never retreat. Tef's membrane pulsed as her neural augments provided historical context. Fascinating. They embraced the persistence trait as a cultural value. Most human cultures do, in their own way, Rivera said. Different expressions of the same basic principle, we decide when we're finished, not our circumstances. Tef accepted the coin, storing it carefully in a containment field. A valuable addition to our xenoanthropological database. Thank you. As Dr. Rivera turned to leave, Tef's membrane pulsed with a final question. Dr. Rivera, do you believe human persistence will endure as your species continues to evolve technologically? Most species in our database eventually develop biological or technological limiters as they advance. Rivera paused, considering. I can't predict the future, but I hope we retain this part of ourselves. The ability to push beyond perceived limitations has given us our greatest achievements along with our worst conflicts. A paradoxical trait, Teff observed. That's humanity in a nutshell, Rivera smiled. Paradoxical, persistent, and completely incapable of recognizing when we're beaten. After the humans departed, Teff spent a final cycle reviewing her research before submitting it to the collective's central database. Her conclusion was both scientific and philosophical.